Tonight on The Best Times, we examine the growing problem of elder abuse and explore the impact of the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse initiative that may become a model for the rest of the nation. Funding for The Best Times is provided by the Plow Foundation, striving to do the greatest good by helping the greatest number of people since 1964. Additional funding is provided by the members of WKNO. Thank you. Hello, I'm Chris Hardaway. Welcome to this edition of The Best Times, a series that looks at life after 50. The National Center on Elder Abuse estimates that between 1 and 2 million older adults, nearly 10% of the elderly population, suffer some form of elder abuse each year. And that's just an educated guess because only 1 out of 23 cases are actually reported. Elder abuse is largely an invisible crime. Too often, victims remain silent, and too often, they and their relatives feel that no one is there to help them. For over 3 years, a Plow Foundation grant has funded the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse Team, or CREA. Tonight, we examine the work that CREA has done and the work that remains in battling elder abuse. On a Wednesday morning, a large group of professionals gather for a training session. These individuals and the diverse agencies they represent are the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse Team. CREA unites law enforcement agencies, healthcare organizations, and legal and victims services in one collaboration aimed at reducing the problem of elder abuse in our community, which can take the form of physical, financial, emotional or sexual abuse, neglect, and even self-neglect. Bonnie Brandel, a nationally recognized expert in the area of elder abuse, is leading the training session. She knows how serious the problem is.
It's a very serious problem nationwide. As 10,000 baby boomers turn 65 every day for the next 16 years, the number of older adults in this country is expanding and exploding in ways that we have never, as a country, seen before.
The PowerPoint presentation gives way to a practical exercise as Bonnie leads the group in a real-life demonstration of the hard choices that victims of abuse often face. The pathway to help is available, but it can be difficult to navigate, and those who are there to help are often hindered by the fact that elder abuse can be difficult to identify and prove.
Elder abuse cases are extremely complicated, and often an older victim is touching a number of systems. Law enforcement may have been the first to come out and visit the home. They may have called Adult Protective Services. The older victim may be engaged with one or more healthcare providers. Maybe a civil attorney could be helpful in terms of getting a protective order. Maybe they need a place to stay and need emergency shelter and victim services. And so typically all of these different agencies have worked in their own silos and had their own case, and because of confidentiality or not even knowing what the other person is doing, they've worked very separately. And so what we found across the country is that collaboration in these cases can be hugely effective, both in looking at individual cases and having providers who are working on the same case come together and do case review with signed releases by the victim, so the victim knows that these conversations are happening and that one case plan can come together for that older adult and one care coordinator is working with that older victim. And that's part of the CREA model that I think is particularly strong and we're seeing effective across the country.
Since CREA's formation in 2015, 690 clients have been served. 2/3 of CREA's clients are female, with the majority being African American. The ages served ranged from 60 to 99, with data showing that a senior's likelihood of being a victim increases with age. Since 2015, physical abuse, neglect, and financial exploitation have accounted for nearly 88% of abuse cases. Legislation has been passed to mandate background checks for professional caregivers. In 2017, passage of the Elderly and Vulnerable Adults Protection Act created VAPIT, the Vulnerable Adult Protective Investigative Team, which operates in District Attorney General's offices statewide. Nearly 2/3 of all victims reported to VAPIT were age 60 or older. Since its inception in 2015, CREA has been able to close 508 cases, a success rate of nearly 74%. One case that CREA closed is that of Bernice and Eddie Love. Bernice and Eddie are soulmates. Listen to what their daughter says about them.
Have you ever seen the movie The Notebook? Because my dad and stepmom are the African-American versions of The Notebook. They literally are. And their interaction is what gives them a better quality of life.
Bernice and Eddie are both 86 years old. Bernice has Alzheimer's. Eddie's mind is sharp, but his eyes are failing him. So certified nursing assistants care for them in their home on a daily basis, and a local family member tends to their finances. One day, Carolyn, who lives 500 miles away in Indiana, received a disturbing phone call from their CNA. A letter had arrived notifying Bernice and Eddie of impending foreclosure proceedings against their home because of failure to pay their taxes.
And I was appalled when she read it because my dad and I had had conversations many times before, and I would ask him, I said, "Daddy, did you pay this? Did you pay that? Because you know this is due here," and so forth. And he would say, "Oh yes, it's being taken care of." And I had no reason to doubt, so therefore I went along with it. Well, when now the CNA is reading this letter to me, I realized that none of that has indeed been taken care of.
Bernice and Eddie were victims of financial abuse and neglect, and the abuser was a family member.
It's unfortunate that anyone would do anything harmful to senior citizens because they are so vulnerable, and especially a senior citizen who's aged and visually impaired and someone close to you. And yet, I think a person may not be in his or her right mind or heart to do something like that. So we forgive them and we move forward, but we also take measures so that that does not reoccur.
Carolyn came to Memphis, and with the help of Belinda Bryan of the Family Safety Center, she was able to straighten out the tax situation and save her parents' home. Through the collaborative agencies of CREA, Carolyn was also able to get legal services to give her power of attorney and draft a written will for her parents. She also obtained additional health care services for her father, who now required a more extensive level of care. But even more importantly, CREA gave Carolyn peace of mind.
When I leave, I can leave with peace of mind, knowing that CREA and all of their extensive social services and medical attendants will be able to have my parents in a safe environment, that I can come and see them, I can lie down at night with rest and assurance, knowing that they're getting the best care that they can. And that makes me feel very, very comfortable and at peace.
This story of financial abuse and neglect by a family member is a very typical scenario that occurs all too often. Carolyn says we should all learn from her cautionary tale.
Whenever it happens, whether you are watching it on television that someone has been taken advantage of, or whether you are the recipient, it's still painful to know that people can be so harmful to others. And especially, as I say, it's like taking candy from a baby.
To find out more about the latest efforts in battling elder abuse, I invited 4 guests into the studio. Oliette Murray Drobo is Executive Director of the Family Safety Center. Sandy Bromley is the Deputy Administrator of the Shelby County Crime Victims Center. And Pharrell Moore and Laura Brown are with Baptist Memorial Hospital. Nationally, the figures say that 1 out of every 10 elder persons can be victims of elder abuse. So my question, I guess, is, and perhaps you might be in the best position to answer this, or maybe both of you, is how serious is the problem here in Memphis and Shelby County?
I would say it is very serious. I think we really look like the national statistics is underreported. Again, we see about 172,000 residents that are 60 years or older. And right now, the coordinated response to elder abuse has served about 700 victims. But again, a lot of cases go underreported, and we think there's just much more abuse and neglect out there. And sometimes people don't know it's happening. It's hard to detect. It's happening behind closed doors, and oftentimes family members are not living in close proximity anymore. You may be in a whole another state from your parents or your grandparents, and sometimes it's behind closed doors and people don't know it's happening.
And sometimes it's family members that are being
the
abusers,
family members.
especially in cases of financial abuse.
Yes,
absolutely.
So it is largely an unreported crime. From your experience, who is at risk? Who is at the greatest risk of elder abuse?
I think folks at the greatest risk are those who are socially isolated. So they have limited connection to the outside world. And so oftentimes it's their family members or caregivers who are the abusers that have control over their daily lives. And so they don't have a way to report or to seek help in any way. And so that's who we really need to be looking out for, folks who have just lost those connections. They've stopped coming to church, they've stopped leaving their house. Those are the folks we want to make sure we're stepping in and asking about.
I want to talk about the role that each of your organizations plays. I want to start with you two, with Baptist Hospital. I remember when I first read the list of organizations and institutions that were a part of the coordinated response to elder abuse team, it struck me, why a hospital? So I'll ask you, why a hospital?
Well, an emergency department or even a primary care doctor's office can be a very pivotal point in identifying elder abuse, because as they kind of mentioned, oftentimes it's not overt signs of abuse that we see. I think what people don't realize sometimes is there's a very manipulative and a very manipulative component to elder abuse, where it's really in the benefit of that abuser sometimes to make it seem as if that person's doing well. And there's also an isolation component to that too. And so sometimes there may not even be an opportunity for intervention until that person gets to the emergency department, either because a coincidental health incident that they have, a heart attack or something like that, or that the abuse becomes so severe that they kind of have to take them to the emergency department.
Is part of it that it's just hard to identify this bruise was made by accident or this bruise was made by an abuser?
Correct. Well, not that it's hard, it's more so of understanding the elder as they age. And a lot of things can be taken out of context, just like you said, because it's a bruise. It could be simply because of medications that they're on, or it could be because of someone doing something malicious. So to kind of bounce off what she said earlier about the question that you asked about who's most vulnerable, also those with cognitive deficits, because a lot of those patients with dementia dementias, Alzheimer's, things like that, they're not usually taken serious, or they're not able to verbalize in an understanding way that something's going on. So specifically, emergency room departments are frontline people. We typically see these patients firsthand, especially when it's something egregious in their worst states, and educating, kind of catching those subtle things like she spoke on.
Now you've developed a training curriculum that is specifically designed to do what you just said.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that curriculum.
Okay.
Okay, so we developed the training curriculum as a multidisciplinary curriculum, so it can be used for anyone from a physician to an AUC, which is essentially like a unit clerk. And it's 4 parts, so it's identification, so kind of talking about what we were just discussing. You know, according to studies, what does differentiate statistically, a bruise that would be more concerning versus a bruise that's less concerning, and other things. And then assessment. So now that we kind of know what those identifying markers are, how do we assess for that? What's the proper way? Should we get someone undressed from head to toe? Should we ask questions in front of family members? Kind of identifying that protocol, because what a lot of hospitals have as standards isn't necessarily effective for identification. And then we also have a portion on cognition. So not just being able to assess for alert and oriented, but going beyond that and identifying, does this person have the capacity to make a decision, and then kind of taking all of those things and putting them together. How do we respond?
Sandy, tell me about the role that the Shelby County Crime Victims Center
Sure.
plays.
So the Crime Victim Center will help victims of elder abuse sort of after it's identified, whether it's by the hospital, maybe Adult Protective Services, maybe law enforcement's called. We will actually do some of the longer term case management and victim advocacy. So that might mean helping them find a new place to live. It might mean walking them through the criminal justice process. It might mean helping with other legal issues, like we work very closely with the Aging Commission around helping folks get guardianship or conservatorship in order to get their finances back on track, get their life back on track after victimization.
So you just sort of hold their hand through the process.
Absolutely.
More or less. And the Family Safety Center, what role does it play?
Sure, so we play a couple roles. One is care coordination, so we have 2 staff members that are care coordinators, and essentially that person's role is to get an understanding of the history of the individual, what's going on. Typically, it might be a family member or a neighbor that's called us with some concerns. So again, it's getting the understanding, is it physical, is it emotional abuse, is there financial abuse going on, and then working with the individual and typically a family to come up with a plan of action, and then to bring in those various agencies that need to be around the table to help with the coordination of care for the individual. And typically a care coordinator may stay engaged with that individual anywhere from 6 months to a year until, again, you were talking about older adults, so you really have to look beyond that temporary situation to long-term planning.
So your role, I would say, is case management? Is that
Pretty
okay?
much case management, and then the other role that we have is just serving as the lead agency to bring all the various agencies together and make sure that work is going smoothly, and we're in communication with each other, and coordination is going smoothly.
Well, speaking of communication coordination, back in 2015, of course, the PLOW grant enabled the formation of CREA, the Coordinated Response to Elder Abuse. First of all, I'd like your thoughts about the concept of CREA. Has it worked? The idea of bringing everybody together to work together. Has it worked?
I would say absolutely. Just speaking from a medical professional's standpoint, I've been a nurse roughly 18 years, and before the formation of this group, things would happen, we would report, we would, try to help a person, but because of the communication breakdown, you never really knew what happened to your patient. And for a nurse, that's a very sad, unhumbling, if that's a word, feeling to go home and not know what came of your patient. Did they get somewhere safe? Did they make it? Did they get the perpetrator out? So the formation of this group, I say, we talk about them nationwide. We've worked very heavily with Baptists to be able to allow them to come into our hospital when we have a problem in order to communicate, keep sharing that information, and then, like she said, following up with that patient. So that, yes, absolutely, I said it has been successful.
Is it simply a case of the left hand knowing what the right hand is doing? I mean, is it?
I think that that's a big part of it. You know, the way that I kind of explain it is that in Memphis, we had a lot of incredible agencies that were working very well and working very diligently to provide services for elders, but they were working in silos. Or if there was communication, then it was it wasn't necessarily uniform. And so it really compromised the consistency of care and continuity of care that an elder would receive. And so, for instance, what might happen is they might discharge from the hospital to a nursing home. Well, maybe if there was, and this is hypothetical, but we do see cases like this often, you know, maybe that discharge happens, but it's not properly relayed, or maybe it's not properly received that it's the husband that's the abuser. And so then they're discharged from the nursing home to that spouse. You know, he comes in and checks them out. So without, you know, the amazing work that they do, we wouldn't have, you know, someone to watch them throughout to say, wait a minute, did someone really update the nursing home, and do they know that this patient isn't to be released?
Now you've been with CREA from the very beginning, this very formation. Identify for me the areas you think where you've made the most progress.
Oh, wow. Well, I would say it's pretty impressive what Baptist Hospital has done. And like they were saying, the fact that sometimes that may be the only interaction that a victim may have to the system in terms of someone noticing what's going on with them. The other part, I would say law enforcement. Yes. Really proud of Memphis Police Department, the Sheriff's Department. They have really stepped up and dedicated detectives that work on these cases. And these can be very labor-intensive, long cases to investigate, right? But they have stepped up to the plate, and they work really well with, you know, the social workers and the case managers and others that are sitting around the table. And I just think it's a smart approach. You know, they're doing what they do well, and we do what we do well, and we all bring those skills to the table.
Absolutely.
If a person sees what they think is elder abuse, what should they do?
I think one of the easiest things is really just to check in, if you can, if it's safe. Check in, say, how are things going? If you're starting to notice something concerning, for example, maybe you are noticing the social isolation, that kind of thing, you know, the check-in is the easiest thing. The second thing is, if you're really concerned and there's no way for you to contact that person, get Adult Protective Services involved, or contact the Family Safety Center, contact the CREA group, because we can actually send people out to the home, conduct an assessment. We can do it in partnership with law enforcement, but you also don't have to report to law enforcement. So really just—
Which is an important point.
Exactly.
I always add that it's anonymous.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Let's talk about the future in a couple of different ways. Let's talk big picture first, because we have a baby boom generation that's aging, and there's a lot of us. And so we all know that in coming years, 20% of the population is going to be over age 65. Seems to me that's only going to increase this problem. So how are we going to address this issue of elder abuse in the future? I mean, you're making a dent right now.
Right.
Yeah.
What happens in the future?
One part of that is awareness, again, for folks to know the warning signs. Two, we often see that financial exploitation or financial abuse is part of it. So really helping folks to think about planning for the future, right? Yeah. What happens to mom or grandmother as they age, in terms of, you know, what is that plan of care for them, so you don't have folks stepping in and taking advantage of them.
Well, one point that has been made here at this table before in previous discussions is that just as children are a vulnerable part of our population, our elders are too, and we don't often think of that, think of them in those ways, do we?
We don't.
We don't.
I think as a society we need to start planning for, like what you said, just the increase in the elder population overall. So we've got to be putting into our budgets and our strategic planning, how are we gonna serve those folks in the same way that we do today, knowing that the population is going to be so much more.
Let's talk about the future of CREA specifically. We'll end on that one, because it was formed, as I said earlier, by the Plow Foundation Aging Initiative Grant back in 2015. And from what I hear, it's done good work over the course of its lifetime, but this is the last year of the grant. The money's run out. what happens next year or the year after.
Sure. Well, part of that was finding CREA a permanent home. So now CREA is a program of the Family Safety Center. It means that we'll continue to work to sustain the work of the group. And so part of that is funding support. And so we've been busy at that, looking at what the priorities are and what the needs are of the organizations that are part of that, and making sure we have enough support to keep the work going. Because again, as you mentioned, the problem is only going to grow, is only going to become more and more challenging, right? And so one of the things we're also looking at how we bring some national resources to play in Memphis and Shelby County, again, so we can continue the good work and help more individuals.
Well, I would just encourage all of you, keep up the good work. Thank you for being on The Best Times and talking about elder abuse.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Under Tennessee law, everyone is a mandatory reporter. If you suspect an older adult is being abused, call the Adult Protective Services hotline. Your report is confidential and your identity will remain anonymous. In an emergency, always call 911 first. Want more information about life after 50? Go online to watch more shows and find more resources. And send us your feedback and story ideas to besttimes@wkno.org. That's all for this edition of The Best Times. Please join us next week for more stories about life after 50. Until then, I'm Chris Hardaway. Thanks for watching. Good night. Funding for The Best Times is provided by the Plow Foundation, striving to do the greatest good by helping the greatest number of people since 1964. Additional funding is provided by the members of WKNO. Thank you.